Do you ever wonder what it was like to be a royal woman in the Middle Ages? You might think that they had a life of luxury, power, and beauty, but the reality was far from that. In fact, being a royal woman in the Middle Ages was a nightmare of hardship, danger, and misery. In this video, we will expose some of the horrifying secrets about royal women during the Middle Ages and how they endured and survived in a harsh and oppressive society. Did you know the Middle Ages were not a good time for women at all? They had to deal with a lot of hate and mistrust from the church and society. They were supposed to just follow their fathers and husbands, no matter what they wanted to do with their lives. It didn't matter if they were queens, abbesses, or ordinary women. They had no say in anything. The Middle Ages were really awful. That's why they were also called the Dark Ages. They didn't have many of the things we have today, like medicine, technology, laws, and even clean water. The Middle Ages, or medieval period, was a long time ago, from the 5th century to the late 15th century. It was after the Roman Empire collapsed and before the Renaissance started. During the Middle Ages, there were many royal women who played important roles in their societies. Women of noble birth were often expected to marry and bear children, but they could also wield political power, especially as queens and regents who exercised royal authority on behalf of absent husbands or underage sons. Some of the most famous royal women of the Middle Ages include Lady Godiva, Lady Jane Grey, Beatrice Galindo, and many others. Outside monastic walls, women could wield political power, especially as queens and regents who exercised royal authority on behalf of absent husbands or underage sons. Women also played important roles in the economy, working as merchants, artisans, and laborers. What do you think life was like for a girl in the Middle Ages? You might be surprised to learn that it was very different from today. Most girls had no choice but to get married as soon as they could have babies, usually at the age of 12. How would you feel if you had to marry someone you didn't know or love at that age? And not only that, but you had to have as many children as possible, because many of them died young. That sounds very hard and sad, doesn't it? Marriages in the Middle Ages were not about love or happiness. They were about preserving wealth, producing an heir, preventing wars, and forming strategic alliances. Your parents or your king would decide who you married based on what was good for them. Sometimes they would marry you off to someone from another country or kingdom to avoid war or make peace. That meant you had to leave your home and your family behind and maybe never saw them again. Can you imagine how lonely and scary that must have been? And once you were married, your main and only purpose was to have children. In the Middle Ages, childbearing was considered the main and only purpose of women in general. And those who were too poor to have servants also had to raise and care for the children they had. They were expected to spend much of their early adulthood pregnant. Noble girls were married as early as 12 to 17 years old. For example, Saint Bridget of Sweden, who founded a religious order of nuns and monks, she got married when she was 13 years old. Margaret of York, who was the sister of King Edward IV of England, she was still single when she was 19 years old, which was very unusual and looked down on. Eleanor of Provence, who was the wife of King Henry III of England. She was only 16 years old when she gave birth to her first son, who became King Edward I. Matilda of Germany, who was the daughter of King Henry I of England. She married the Roman Emperor when she was 12 years old, which was very young even for that time. Catherine of Aragon, who was the first wife of King Henry VIII of England. She married his older brother Arthur when she was 15 years old. They had a big wedding in St. Paul's Cathedral in London in 1501. It was very important and mandatory for a noblewoman to be a virgin at marriage for practical reasons. Once married, she would be treated according to her husband's demands. This was the way of the world at the time. He could be kind and sweet or cruel, wicked, and thoughtless. It was all his choice. You can simply imagine what women who wed a cruel man went through. When they recovered from childbirth, women were responsible for keeping their homes livable, which was a full-time job. Some royal women never got married because their parents couldn't pay their dowry. They would be sent to a convent, where they would live as nuns. This was seen as a way of hiding their shame. Women in the Middle Ages had fewer periods because they were pregnant so often. Nowadays, we have modern technology and medicine to help us determine pregnancy and childbirth. We have fetal monitors, ultrasound scans, and epidurals. We have lower risks for mother and baby. But in the medieval period, giving birth was very dangerous. Sometimes the baby would be in the wrong position, and both the mother and child would die. Sometimes the labor would last for days or weeks, and some women would die of exhaustion and pain. Sometimes they would try to do a cesarean section, but only if the mother or baby was already dead or dying. And it was not always successful. Most pregnant women were helped by midwives, not doctors. Midwives had no formal training, but they learned from experience. They helped mothers during labor, and they could baptize the babies if they were dying. After giving birth, women could still die from infection and complications. They had very basic equipment, and they often had to use their hands to help the baby out. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, noble or common. These problems affected women. Even Jane Seymour, who was the third wife of King Henry VIII, died after giving birth to her son, Edward VI, in 1537. Royal women in the Middle Ages had to follow many expectations, but some of them also showed their power and influence. For example, Queen Isabel of Castile and Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine were both great political leaders who shaped their kingdoms, but they also faced many hardships and dangers, such as forced marriages, rebellions, and childbirth. Their lives were not easy or happy, but they were remarkable and inspiring. Imagine being a woman who cheated on her husband in the Middle Ages. You would face a terrible punishment. Your nose and ears would be cut off. This was done to ruin your beauty and make you unattractive to any man. But if your husband cheated on you, he would only have to pay a fine or maybe get away with it. A woman who slept around could also be locked in a drunkard's cloak, a punishment also known as the walk of shame. This was common for women who were accused of being prostitutes or nagging wives. They would have to walk barefoot through the city, sometimes in their underwear. The streets were rough and sharp, and the people would laugh and mock them. They would make loud noises with pots and pans and spit on the woman. Sometimes they would drag her out of bed at night and parade her through the town. Some women tried to look beautiful by using makeup in the Middle Ages, but their makeup was very dangerous for their health. It could even kill them. One example is Queen Elizabeth I, who used a makeup called the Venetian ceruse. It was made of vinegar and lead, which is very poisonous. It made her skin look very pale, which was fashionable and attractive to men at the time. But the problem was that the lead could make her sick or die if she used it for a long time. And she did use it for a long time, because she didn't wash it off often. She left it on her face for at least a week before cleaning it. And when she did clean it, her skin looked gray and withered. What do you think of the lives of royal women in the Middle Ages? Do you think they were treated fairly or unfairly? How do you think they felt about their roles and responsibilities? How do you think they coped with the dangers and difficulties they faced? Please leave your comments below and share your thoughts and opinions with us. We would love to read them and learn from you. Thank you for watching.